All right, folks, it looks like we've stabilized on our attendance here, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. First off, I'm going to cover a couple of housekeeping items. My name is Peter Gies. I'm with the Broward Metropolitan Planning Organization, and we are one of the hosts of the Safe Street Summit this year. For those of you who've attended the Safe Street Summit in the past, you know we typically will rotate the Safe Street Summit host between the different MPOs. Unfortunately, this year we've had to take the entire summit virtual. However, this is a great opportunity for us to learn some new skill sets. I know many of us have been working with different platforms, whether it be Zoom or Teams, but this is certainly a new way to experience the Safe Street Summit, and we're all very thankful that we were still able to have one, and we appreciate you joining us here today. Again, just some quick housekeeping items. I do want to make all of the participants aware that we will have a question and answer session after the presentation. And if you do have questions that are coming up as the presenters are presenting, please make sure to enter your questions for the presenters into the chat box, and they will be accumulated, and I will make sure to ask those questions at the end of the session. In addition, this session is closed captioning enabled. So if you would like those closed captions enabled, please click on the closed caption button in your Zoom toolbar and choose the option to show the live transcript. Additionally, for those who are visually impaired, the session is compatible with NVDA, JAWS, VoiceOver, and Android TalkBack screen readers. So we've made the accommodations to make sure we're fully accessible here. And we appreciate everyone joining again. Very quickly here, just wanted to read off the results of this poll that you've taken as you entered the session. What mode of transportation did you use to get to school? A lot of folks put walking on foot, and the next highest response was personal vehicle and bus. So I'm hoping that a lot of you folks are all transportation professionals, and your experience while you were traveling to and from school hopefully influenced your career path and your career decision. But thank you for sharing that with us. Before we jump into the session, I did just want to touch on just a little bit of an anecdote on my part. I grew up in Munich, Germany, and I, at a very young age, was encouraged to walk to school as of about first grade. And I always wondered when I was walking to school why streets weren't designed for a little person like me. And it became very clear when I moved here to the United States that what I had over in Munich, Germany was far friendlier than what we have here in the United States. So I'm a firm believer that if you can design a street for children, you've designed it for all people. And I think the folks who are here on the call today are a true testament to the improvements that we're trying to make in our transportation infrastructure, and how we are also trying to teach kids to interact with their built environment in a way that suits them. And we all know that when we're teaching kids, we're more likely to have greater success than we do with adults. As adults, we are all very stubborn and set in our ways. But targeting kids is a great way to make sure that we pass on a culture of walking and biking, and ensuring that the built environment truly works for all folks. So that's just my little short story. I'm going to transition now over to the speakers and go ahead and introduce them. So Kurt, if you could move on to the next slide, please. We've got a great panel here today, starting with Sabine Delouche. Sabine is the manager for the University of Miami WalkSafe and BikeSafe programs. She has worked to implement pedestrian and bicycle safety programming and education in over 250 schools and countless communities statewide. As a daily pedestrian and recreational cyclist, she hopes to promote and enjoy equitable transportation systems which provide connectivity to where people live, work, and play. Kurt Kaminer is the social media marketing manager for the University of Miami WalkSafe and BikeSafe program. And as a Miami native, Kurt grew up in a region that was firmly entrenched in car-centric planning by the late 1980s. Having rediscovered the bicycle in his early teens, he began to see past the windshield bias that many of us have been born into. Since then, he has delved deep into the science of streets and made it his mission to encourage safe infrastructure as a social marketing manager of the UHealth WalkSafe and BikeSafe programs. In his free time, Kurt is an avid vintage bicycle collector, protected bike lane advocate, utility cyclist, and curator of the Bike Share Museum. So needless to say, Kurt certainly walks the walk when it comes to this topic here. Next, we have Wen Dang, who is the city traffic engineer for the city of West Palm Beach. Wen serves as a city traffic engineer and oversees all transportation elements for the city of West Palm Beach. She led in the city's adoption of the Vision Zero policy and developed the city's multimodal transportation program. She is part of leadership NACTO and the 2020 Smart Cities Collaborative Cohort. In 2021, Uyen launched the Smart Loading pilot program to utilize technology to manage curb space within the city. And finally, we have Jessica Keller, who is the Assistant Public Works Director for the Sustainable Public Infrastructure Division of the City of Coral Gables. Jessica has worked in both the private and public sectors, always following her passion for safe streets for over 23 years. She attended Frostburg State University and the University of Maryland, where she earned her bachelor's degree in environmental analysis and planning and master's degree in engineering. Jessica worked for the City of Baltimore as a chief transportation planning official and the Maryland Transit Administration as a service development director before moving with her son to join the City of Coral Gables, where she has been for nearly 9 years. She works closely with colleagues in various departments to integrate safe street strategies that are not traditionally folded into the engineering and planning processes. So Jessica is a true plangineer, as I like to call her. Plangineer is a rare breed in our profession, but one that is definitely needed. And I know they make a huge difference in the implementation of complete streets and our mission to make streets safer for everyone. So with that, I'm going to turn the podium, the virtual podium, over to Sabine Delouche, the program manager for the University of Miami WalkSafe and BikeSafe program, and she's going to provide an overview of the work that University of Miami WalkSafe and BikeSafe does. So Sabine, take it away.
Thank you so much, Peter. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Sabine, and I'm excited to be able to be here today to share about WalkSafe and our newest resource. And a little bit about the WalkSafe program. We are a nonprofit, and we're based out of the University of Miami. We're housed at the Miami Project to Cure Paralysis, and our main function is really to promote youth injury prevention. And really through all of the programming that we do, we also encourage the use of walkable environments, and we try to promote and really improve physical activity in children and families. And the core component of our programs is education. Some people may be familiar with our WalkSafe curriculum. It's implemented currently in Miami-Dade public schools and has been mandated here since 2003. And we also aim to provide education outside of the classroom through our online platforms and community events and programming. And although we're based in Miami, we have been able to expand to other Florida counties, and that does include both Broward and Palm Beach. That's been made possible through the Safe Routes to School grant and Florida Department of Transportation. So here you can kind of see a snapshot of a few of the counties that we've been in over the last several years. And these ones are the ones that we've been funded to be physically present. However, all of our resources are available online, so really anyone can implement WalkSafe and utilize all of our materials. Everything that's found on the website is available for free and able to download. So I have some examples here, as you can see, the curriculum, some of our safety flyers, and other resources like the Walk to School Day Planning Guide, which hopefully you'll be able to use once this pandemic is over. And along with education, again, we have a really big presence in the community. We thrive through community partnerships with parks, with cities, and other entities to be able to provide our programming outside of schools and outside of the classroom. And so in the past, really, our approach to education has been pretty simple. We've focused on conventional safety advice, such as look left, right, left, and make sure that you're crossing at the crosswalk. However, we have come to realize that that is just skimming the surface when it comes to road safety education. And so just like infrastructure, we have adopted a new approach to education, a really more complete streets approach, and have rolled out this resource this year. And it's actually, this model of education currently is not super common and sometimes can contradict safe streets. However, we're realizing just how important and essential it really is to be able to share about design and whatnot through our education. And so with that, I'm going to hand things over to our social marketing manager, Kaminer, who can share about this resource with everyone.
Thank you, Sabine. And just quickly, I'd like to give a thank you to Don Kostelek of Kostelek Planning, who was of great assistance in the creation of this presentation. And I'd like to start with a bit of history about our streets first to give context to where education and advocacy is now. As we're all probably aware, street engineering, after many years of prioritizing automobile speed here in the US, is evolving towards safe systems design instead. Design, of course, that makes it difficult for drivers to speed or make a mistake that's life-threatening to others. These are usually called complete streets, as they are here in Florida, and sometimes they're categorized within a holistic vision zero approach. Temporary measures are often called tactical urbanism, and regardless of the name, the end goal is to achieve the same thing. However, the narrative that pervades road safety education and public service announcements do not often reflect these efforts. If anything, they heavily reinforce the outgoing idea that drivers have unquestioned priority and that pedestrians bear the majority or equal responsibility for crashes. And I can't emphasize enough that this responsibility is not equally shared. The images you see here aren't isolated incidents. They're real examples of the dangers facing vulnerable road users today. And the imbalances in both danger and messaging posed to vulnerable road users versus automobile users are correlated by case studies and scientific research. But there's a historical reason why this messaging perseveres. In the 1920s, the auto industry, eager to appropriate mostly pedestrianized roads for themselves, launched expansive campaigns against pedestrians crossing mid-block, what was then newly coined as jaywalking. These campaigns were accusatory and offensive and designed to socially engineer society into accepting that the automobile was the unquestioned heir to the street. And there were converse campaigns and newspaper articles that pointed out the safety imbalance, especially for kids. Still, the few campaigns that existed were not backed with the same budget, so this message was not heard with the same frequency. The social engineering worked. As the car was normalized, these messages were sanitized and given the leave it to beaver treatment, giving us the squeaky clean look before crossing and watch for cars messaging in the 1950s. But they still placed onus on pedestrians, especially kids. And as comedian Adam Conover noted in his send-up of the topic, these messages have prevailed mostly unchanged today, even though the gist of them are at odds with safe streets and the principles of Vision Zero. And as a result, despite the evidence and research behind safe streets, a large portion of PSAs and campaigns produced today are simply modernized versions of the same subtly degrading messages. And I'm sorry to say some of them are almost as offensive as those from the past. Now, the problem is we've been born into this messaging. We likely received it as children ourselves, and we repeat it without questioning it. And though it's not bad advice to tell people to keep an eye out for reckless drivers, particularly on streets that are inherently unsafe, those involved in promoting road safety have no business continually normalizing and excusing bad driver behavior instead of promoting measures leading to that street's redesign. And this continued skewing of responsibility is not only a knowledge problem, but a huge barrier to getting safe streets built. Case in point, in Miami, many can't fathom the idea that there's any alternative to more lanes and faster speed limits, having lived with them for so long. The suggestion of safe streets tends to get rejected out of fear that their livelihood will become even more difficult. And it's only worse if someone's first encounter with safe or slow streets comes as a relative surprise for a public meeting. I've seen funded projects die to this fear, compounded by the lack of political will to consider safety over the status quo. No less than a double whammy of working against the aforementioned social engineering of car-centric thought and general human nature of fearing change. Put simply, it's not just the infrastructure. Safety messaging from all sides must undo the damage of history. We must encourage forth new narratives that champion the person on foot in need of a safe crosswalk, the person who uses a wheelchair who needs an adequate width crosswalk, or the person on a bicycle in need of a protected bike lane. But what could education about infrastructure look like, especially if someone isn't a planner or engineer? Well, we've taken a shot at it. And so since we're a youth first educational organization, and also since we needed something virtual in light of COVID-19, we developed Better Streets for Kids, WalkSafe Virtual Education. This is a self-paced 5-lesson exercise for youth or even parents, and it discusses topics that educational messaging usually omits. And let me show you how it handles the message. In lesson 1, we talk about basic signs, signals, types of intersections, and crossing guards, pretty standard stuff. And in lesson 2, we take a look at the old stop and look left, right, left advice. And at no time do we ever pass any judgment that assumes the reader already violates this advice, nor do we try scare tactics to suggest that they should. It's a neutral explanation, as is the railroad crossing safety in lesson 4. However, the narrative changes in lesson 3. Using the previous lessons as a foundation, we discuss right turns on red, the one thing that is virtually nullified, look left, right, left, as a catch-all teaching advice for crossing the street. Instead of truncating reality, lesson 3 takes a realistic look into how drivers often violate the crosswalk and how problematic it is to create an exception where a driver can go on a red, but a pedestrian is in danger to go on a walk signal. And of course, there's the danger of unprotected left turns on green, which are discussed too. Importantly, all of these lessons lead into the safer street design in lesson 5. And to explain how design alone could possibly result in a street that can self-enforce slower speeds and better driver behavior, we start with a video about doors. Yes, doors. A few years ago, Vox Media produced this video about how design influences expectations and behavior by discussing something everyone can relate to: door handles that we automatically pull and find out the door is made to be pushed. And it's arguably the best video on the internet to explain the link between human behavior and design, and a perfect corollary to how a street that looks like a drag strip results in speeding, and how safe design can prevent this. And with all this backstory in place, we present a slideshow of what we call the 10 things for safe streets. This is a slider that shows curb extensions, median islands, pedestrian scrambles, and other design elements that not only make walking more enjoyable, they encourage drivers to slow down and behave responsibly around pedestrians. And most of these examples are based on the FHWA's PedSafe countermeasures. So these are essentially Federal Highway Administration endorsed safety solutions being presented to the general public. It's a testament to the fact that from a functionality standpoint, complex engineering concepts can be presented in a manner a child or parent can understand. And finally, there's an art contest that encourages kids to engage in a craft project where they redesign a street in front of their house, in front of their school, in front of their neighborhood, so they can apply what they've learned here. Now, the information here is not really new if you're an engineer or planner, but it's how it's being delivered that's new, as is who it's being delivered to. Street design is usually discussed on a professional level, but these are the same concepts in the form of a digital kids picture book. They're easy to understand. And this sort of content is an acknowledgement that kids are constantly seeking understanding of why things are the way they are, while simultaneously capturing parents when they're most likely to have an open mind about the purpose of our streets. And this is only one example of how we can change to a positive design-focused narrative about street safety. A lengthy explanation like these lessons do not work for a flyer or social media post, but it doesn't mean it's impossible to state a pedestrian-first message with brevity. Case in point, here's our Halloween flyer, which we've used since 2017. All of the onus is on drivers to drive slowly and respectfully. And if you miss any of the text, the headline and image say it all. It goes viral every year on Twitter, where it is shared by planners and family safety advocates tired of hearing dots throughout the US telling kids to dress up as reflective traffic cones and fail to denounce the drivers that caused the safety issues in the first place. And I should note, FDOT actually followed a similar approach this year with the onus of safety all on drivers and drivers only. And good campaigns like these are slowly beginning to gain traction. And the more of them that people begin to hear, the more people will begin to question the automotive-centric status quo set 90 years ago and think about safety instead. And mind you, we're already at a point with Jalopnik, the online automobile news site whose slogan is literally "Drive free or die," is publishing articles criticizing NHTSA and auto manufacturers for shifting blame to pedestrians. And that says a lot about where our future messaging needs to go. And finally, let's not forget that actual action to change these streets is more important and effective than any messaging campaign. Sure, the campaigns, they can help undo the damage of yesteryear, and that's why they're important. But no amount of asking drivers to behave is going to matter to those who aren't willing to change their behavior. Our streets have to prevent this behavior in the first place and give space back to our kids. And this said, WalkSafe at Home is available right now for anyone to use for our website. The link is in the presentation. And we'd be thrilled if you happen to share or recommend it where you work. The one thing above all else that we want is this to be an inspiration to you and your communications department's tasked with street safety messaging. You could look at it as a template of sorts, which you can examine and get inspiration from to create other new complete streets messaging free of windshield bias and misplaced onus. And with that, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Wen Dang and Jessica Keller to share ideas about how programs like these can be promoted through municipalities and organizations.
Great, thank you so much. I love to highlight the city of West Palm Beach, our safety program, and what we have incorporated the WalkSafe program itself in our community engagement. In 2018, the city launched our first Vision Zero program at the city. With that directive, our Vision Zero coordinator established and created one of the largest task force in the state. And together with our stakeholders, such as the school board or the Palm Beach TPA, even including very important stakeholders such as St. Mary's Hospital, we really discussed a strategy on how to educate our communities first. So we know that in West Palm Beach, more than 50% of the crashes are on state and county roads. And those are the most vulnerable communities within the city. We know that the most severe crashes happen on a multi-lane, fast-moving roadway, but those within our roadway is also the gateway to our first responder. And because of that, we really want to collaborate with our police and fire department as we take a deeper dive on to balance safety and within our response time. And before we can engage the community, we really want to collaborate with them in every step of the way and fully understand the complexity of their job. And as an outcome, our community, some surprising elements is that, our firefighters are really prefer bike lanes over parking spaces because it gives them very quick and direct access to your home. So those are some of the surprising elements that we find as we engage internally. Once we have those questions answered by our first responders, we find it very easy to collaborate with the community and truly create great education events. So in 2019, we had over 40 education events that ranges from high school crash reenactment and also a summer safety program, and really connecting with children of all ages and really messaging not only look before you cross, but important messages like if you want to have safe streets, you have to build safe roadways. And sometimes you have to sacrifice travel lanes, what in our field of engineering we call capacity, so that we can have wider walking space for our kids. So often people told us that they want cars to slow down. But they really don't know how to frame that question into traffic calming. And so we have throughout our program, and especially a policy in the city, we have a traffic calming advisory policy that mapped out a thorough process where residents and community leaders can advocate for traffic calming. This gives staff like myself an opportunity to share before and after data, such as, for example, this roundabout that we built, the first ever protected roundabout for bikes in the city. It wasn't easy while we suffered many hours of negative comments during design and construction, but with the after data, this is the data that's actually very powerful that we saw a reduction in 85th percentiles within our street network. And so with that, we can say that where we started and where we're heading is in the right direction. But this is not enough. We often have to connect with our communities for engagement. For example, our Walk to School event was organized by our wonderful Vision Zero coordinator with our fire department and our police department. Together with our police officer and our firefighters, we walk the streets with their kids. While most school events, most Walk to School events take place on a sidewalk, we want our children to feel safe on the road and take back the space that they were allowed to play on. While engaging, we can't do this without our PR firm. And this is a little bit unconventional, but we wanted to reach people in many ways as we have a series of campaigns. So in 2019, we invested over $272,000 in marketing and advertising. And because of that, we were able to reach over 3.4 million people in this general area. Actions that are accomplished, such as speed bumps programs, were developed because of this. Next slide, please. And because of that, we established such a large program with not only shared streets that we have in our downtown area, but we were able to upgrade our school zones. Basic maintenance that is already in place, we were able to repurpose those dollars and prioritize in communities of needs. Next slide, please. As a result, we were able to reduce crashes, and this is the data that was shared to us by our police department. These are the data that have yields by just educating out of this safety program. And so in 2018, as you can see, from 2018 to 2019, we saw a reduction on crashes within our target area. And so we were able to accomplish this with only education, because again, 50% of our high crashes areas are really along state and county roadways. And so without having to make physical infrastructure changes, we were able to do this with the amount of engagement we have. So during COVID, we hosted a bi-monthly meetings, a series of webinar called Transportation Tuesday, and collaboratively we work with our nonprofits such as RISE to live stream on Facebook, and it's archived on the city's YouTube channel. We invite residents to participate with nonprofits and that really recruit residents in low-income neighborhoods to be our guests, that they don't have access to the internet, that gives them a personal connection to create a community dialogue as we engage. So even with all the qualitative data, we listen to our residents' concerns to fill in the missing gaps of our analysis. So we were able to be resilient even during the time of COVID. And with that, I'm gonna turn over to Jessica.
And Jessica, before you begin, I just want to remind all of the participants that you may submit your questions in the chat box. Also, if you refer to the chat box, you will see that one of our technical advisors just posted a link to a survey that will be coming up in this presentation. So for those of you who would like to tee that up, I would encourage you to do so. And Jessica, I'll turn it back over to you. Thanks.
Thank you. As previously mentioned, I'm Jessica Keller, the Assistant Public Works Director for the City of Coral Gables. I'm going to talk a little bit about why implementing educational programs for children is important. I love the concept of engaging children because selfishly, it just might make our jobs as practitioners easier in 10 years. And I'll elaborate more on that in the presentation. This is one of my favorite photos. That's my son admiring one of our decorative crosswalks across from the City of Coral Gables City Hall. So I want to get a feel for the room. You can access the anonymous poll. It's anonymous, so you feel free to check them all. You can use the QR code by opening your camera, and it will take you straight there. You can use the link in the chat, or you can go to www.menti.com and enter the code 9661839. You can choose all that apply. We have planners, politicians, engineers, comedians. Do you love your job or do you hate your job? And I'll give you a few moments. So the answers are coming back. It looks like most people love their job. We have a couple of engineers, mostly planners. We have a couple of politicians, and that's great to see because political champions are so important to implementing complete streets. If you haven't met me before, I see some people here that have met me before, and I'm glad to see you again. I often use humor, often dark, to cope with what I call my Safe Street implementation PTSD. When originally asked to participate, I was wondering if I could hold a group therapy session, but the organizers weren't really into it. So I teamed up with Kurt, Sabine, and Uyen to help present WalkSafe's tool and hopefully inform the group of how useful it might be in our professions. I personally, as you've heard, I'm a planner, I'm an engineer. I think I'm a little bit funny sometimes. I love my job and I hate my job. So you can see why I thought a group therapy session might be helpful. My favorite lesson in the WalkSafe program is lesson 5, as Kurt mentioned. To me, this is where the meat is. Here in Coral Gables, we've implemented some of those that are highlighted in the lesson, and starting in the photos from left to right, one of my favorites was the protected bike lanes, which met huge resistance and were ultimately removed. Again, that's my son. He loved them and really enjoyed riding in a space that had been occupied by fast-moving cars. We have wide sidewalks and high emphasis crossings that we're using to fill in sidewalk gaps where we can. They're typically met with resistance in front of homes, but anywhere we do build new sidewalks, we build them no less than 6 feet wide so people can walk comfortably side by side. We also install continental crosswalks, which are also met with resistance, believe it or not, because people see them as an eyesore. But overall, they're accepted, especially by people who actually walk around their neighborhood. Implementation of 25-mile-per-hour speed limits on local residential streets was also met with resistance, but after explaining the safety benefits versus the 12 seconds added to a commute of cut-through traffic, we ultimately changed the speed limit and are looking to do the same on our collector streets. In-ground pedestrian crossings were installed in neighborhoods at over 200 locations as part of an awareness campaign about pedestrian priority. And over time, we've decided that we'll maintain them at schools and parks because, as you can imagine, we lost quite a number of those paddles. I want to share this next photo because it's ironic. We spent over $20 million widening sidewalks, but we left out critical infrastructure for children. It's illegal to ride bikes on this street, on the sidewalk on this street, I'm sorry. And also I want to point out the size of the SUV parked adjacent to the bicycles. And we're going to head back for another poll. Again, it's anonymous. You can use the QR code, or you can follow the link in the chat, or go to www.menti.com and enter the code 9661839. Who has experienced the following in their profession? Hostile community meetings, bad press, YIMBYs, that's yes in my backyard, NIMBYs, not in my backyard, stalkers, or none of these. And I'm not getting any feedback, so I'm hoping that it's actually working. I'll give you a couple of seconds. Okay, it's not working. Oh wait, it is. There we are. Okay, so we have lots of people who have been to hostile community meetings. They've received bad press. YIMBYs are nice. Lots of NIMBYs, stalkers, unfortunately. But no one has had none of these. I've had them all. I bring this up because not only does the WalkSafe tool teach safety to our vulnerable users, it'll also teach them that they're entitled to safe streets and they should expect them and not fear them. I spoke at Career Day when my son was in the 3rd grade and they were learning about graphs, so I decided to conduct an exercise that aligned with their curriculum. First, I asked the students how they traveled to school, and the results were 17 were driven and 1 walked. Then I asked how they would like to get to school, and you can see in the second graph how things changed. And finally, I asked if they thought that transportation was kid-friendly, and all but 1 answered no, and I bet you can guess why. They didn't feel safe. 5th graders are currently learning about walk scores and sustainability in Miami-Dade schools, and I asked my son if he told his classmates that we are actually car-free, and he said no, because he doesn't want people to think we're poor. So clearly we have work to do. So here we are. When Kurt asked me to be on this presentation team, I had no idea what I would talk about because, frankly, I feel pretty run down. As practitioners, our jobs can be difficult, especially without political champions. But then I saw the WalkSafe tool and I was immediately sold. I told Kurt and Sabine we had to get this implemented in the Gables, and it was much easier than I had anticipated. The leadership team of the Parks and Recreation Department immediately said, yes, let's do it. And not only will it be incorporated in lessons for after-school care, but also in summer camp and for special events. One idea is when we market our Gables Bike Day, we'll suggest participants complete the lessons, and then they would be entered to win a new bike. I'm really excited about rolling out this in our city, and I'm feeling more optimistic, believe it or not. And I'm hoping by educating our children that future planners and engineers will encounter less resistance trying to make streets safe for all users. Thank you, and I believe it's question time.
So thank you very much to all the presenters. I gave you a virtual clap since I know we're not able to be in person, but thank you very much. I would like to encourage all the participants to ask any questions that you have in the chat box. Go ahead and type it out there, and we will make sure that we ask the question here to the panel. In the meantime, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box as of yet, but I do want to ask a question of the panel. And I think there was a theme that I wanted to hit on that I heard between Sabine, Kurt, Uyen, and Jessica. And first, I'd like to target the question to both Jessica and Uyen is messaging is really important, right? And how you message things is extremely important. And I think, Jessica, you mentioned, you know, folks may have been opposed to a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit, but when you told them that it cost them 12 seconds on their commute, then all of a sudden, you know, it seemed to be more reasonable, right? So Uyen or Jessica, either one of you can go first. How do you go ahead crafting that message? How, you know, do you know what you need to say to people? Is there a way that you typically approach that? Because I think that's sometimes tough for planners and engineers, is we like to stick to the data. We like to be very dry, right? So how do you go about that? What are some tricks of the trade that you have?
Well, we have hired marketing firms to do some of the work. But even then, when we thought we had it nailed, and even with marketing firms, we had projects fail. So for, at least in my experience, it's been hit or miss. We really try to stick to the data and the facts. I find a lot of times that the drama, though, kind of wins out. So I'm starting to wonder if maybe I should take drama class, and maybe it'll be a little bit more effective.
Uyen, any experiences?
Absolutely. I think, well, obviously, as an engineer, we're not very good at communicating. And very similar to Jessica, yes, we do use a lot of data to help validate what we want to do. But we do, in the city, we do have a community engagement group that helps manage and really normalize a lot of these questions, or a lot of these the request that comes in, because we not necessarily do understand what residents want. They just want cars to slow down. And so again, it's a common theme that we see, and they don't necessarily know how to get to the answer. So even though we're not exactly the best at being relatable to our community, I do think that there are people within the city that are highly trained to engage our residents in a non-threatening way. The other aspect of it is I do believe that you do have neighborhood and community leaders that are champions at helping us getting the message out, and that are for example, the nonprofits. They know those people that's living on the street. They know what they're asking for, and they're advocating on behalf.
Great, thank you. Oh,
Peter,
go ahead,
do you
Kurt.
mind if I jump in on that? You know, the interesting thing is that there's a theory of communication that if you're trying to change culture in certain ways like this, that you basically have the people who absolutely don't want to have anything to do with, let's say, bike lanes or sidewalks, whatnot. You have those who are agreeable to it, you have those who are very agreeable to it, and then you have the group that's basically yourself, everybody who's, you know, it's yes no matter what. And that if you're going to communicate to any of these people, the only ones that it's a gradual transition to get people from the maybe stage to the yes stage. But you'll never actually be able to work with the people in, you know, the first stage, which is absolutely not. You have to gradually work with those who are the most amenable to actually come on over to the side of safe streets first, and gradually work upon that, which is one of the reasons why I've actually referred to the WalkSafe at home as a very gradual procedure. And, you know, reversing 90 years of basically, you know, car-centric ideals.
Thank you, thank you. So Jessica, I see Carlos Cruz Casas is already starting to raise funds for a drama class, so you've got
Thank you.
there. Here's a question from Kelsey Peterson. I think it's a good one that says, beyond education campaigns, how can planners get children more involved in the planning and design process for safe streets? I'll throw that out to anyone who wants to answer first.
Well, so I bring my son, I'm engaged, you know, this is my job. And my son participates in all kinds of planning activities. We just finished a parks master plan. I bring my child along. I think that we as practitioners need to lead that charge. So when we are having public engagement forums, we need to tell people, bring your children, and then offer activities for their children while they're there. And that's something we're starting to do here in the Gables, but things slowed down a little bit with COVID.
That's a fantastic idea. And I love the idea of encouraging people to bring their children, because that's sometimes one of the barriers to getting people to come out to a public meeting, right? And providing activity. That's fantastic. Jessica, very quickly, another question. Natalia asks, why were the separated bike lanes removed that you mentioned in your presentation?
Kurt, can you go back to that slide?
Absolutely.
Because it's important it's important to the answer. It's the slide on the left. They were ugly. That's the answer for this particular segment. And these were temporary. They were just a pilot. And we spent over $30,000 on a pilot, and these were too ugly to be in the city. There was another portion that was connected to on an intersecting street. On that particular street, we had one business that came to City Hall and said that we were taking all of their parking. And this is where the frustration comes in play as it relates to data. Every single day, 3 times a day, we did a parking inventory of how many parking spaces were available within 1 block of that business. And 3 times a day, that was at 9 o'clock, it was at 1 o'clock, and it was at the right before work was over. There were an average of 10 within 1 block every single day. And so it was a case where the data just didn't matter. It was the drama behind just opposing the bike lanes altogether.
And if I recall right, that only took 2 spaces or 3 spaces in front of that business, correct?
It took 2, yes.
2. Mm-hmm. In fact, I might add that, sometimes we can be our own worst enemies in that, at least from advocate standpoints, in that when that came out, I heard a lot of people who would otherwise advocate for protected bike lanes complaining about the fact that it was a dual lane cycle track, which I get it. I understand it. But still, I mean, when you're grasping at straws.
No, that's a very good point, is that we had infighting in our own community. And when I say that, I mean people who advocate for safe infrastructure, that it's not the infrastructure that they wanted. And, we can't fight amongst ourselves.
Got to get it down on the ground.
Yeah, I'd like to add, Jessica, and I know that maybe back in 2017 that the trend for tactical urbanism was like, it was just trendy for every community to try something different. And as a result of that, we end up painting a lot of crosswalks. But like projects like this, I think it's actually very important because you're showing like the neighborhood or the community that the geometry fits, right? Because a lot of it is really trying to make sure that we have complete streets in a very limited space, but very similar to what we found. And I think a little bit of West Palm Beach and Coral Gables are very similar because we have high-end residents, and what they're really asking for are high-end finishes. And so what we found is, for example, some of our shared streets downtown, we end up doing 1 block first, and that's part of our strategy, and really show people what it could look like. And of course, after the 1 block that's being completed, now we have Rosemary Square and Clemetta Streets as the way it is. So similar to other projects that we built around town, it's really the way to, the way to get community buy-ins is really investing a lot of money, because even though I'm looking at this as safe facilities because I'm a transportation professional, people who live along that streets, they're just too afraid because their values are different, right? They want to see high-end finishes, in my opinion.
I apologize. I'm going to have to exercise my authority here as a moderator, and I would like to thank each of the panelists, Kurt, Jessica, Sabine, and Uyen. Thank you so much. A phenomenal set of presentations there, and I know that given the amount of chatter that's going on in the box, it certainly generated a lot of interest. So before we let you all go, just again, some end of the line housekeeping here. We want to let you know that there's a link to the evaluation form in the chat box. Please make sure that you fill that out, share your thoughts on today's session. And additionally, there's a link to the Safe Streets Summit People's Choice Award in the chat box as well, where you can cast your vote for your favorite complete streets effort in Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach. And with that, we'll close this session. Thanks again to our presenters. Thanks to the participants who joined, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.